The winter sun cast long shadows across the rehabilitation center's garden in Boston, where 23-year-old Emma Collins sat alone in her wheelchair, her eyes fixed on the bare branches swaying against the pale January sky. It had been 11 months since the accident that paralyzed her from the waist down, 11 months of pain, frustration, and the slow, excruciating dissolution of her former life. Before the crash, Emma had been a dance student at Boston Conservatory, her days filled with movement and music. Now she struggled just to maneuver her wheelchair down the hallway without assistance. The rehabilitation sessions were grueling, and despite the encouraging words from her therapists, Emma had begun to accept the bitter reality that she might never walk again. The accident had happened on a rainy evening as she was returning from a weekend trip with her boyfriend Kyle. A truck had crossed the center line on the slick highway, hitting them head-on. Kyle walked away with minor injuries, but Emma's spine had been crushed, leaving her without sensation or movement below her waist. "I'll stay with you no matter what," Kyle had promised in the hospital. Yet as weeks of frustrating therapy stretched into months with little progress, his visits became less frequent and his texts more perfunctory. 6 months after the accident, Kyle left a note with a nurse. He couldn't do this anymore, he wrote. He needed to live his life. Emma had crumpled the paper in her fist, anger burning through her veins before giving way to a hollowness that seemed to swallow her from within. "Aren't you cold out here?" A deep voice startled Emma from her thoughts. She looked up to see an older man standing nearby, his silver hair contrasting with his dark blue coat. He held 2 cups of steaming liquid and seemed slightly uncomfortable, as if unsure whether he should approach her. "I'm fine," Emma replied curtly, hoping he would leave. She had grown tired of the pitying glances and awkward conversations from well-meaning strangers. The man nodded, respecting her desire for solitude, but before turning to go, he set one of the cups on the bench near her wheelchair. "Hot chocolate," he said simply. "It helps on cold days." Then he walked away, leaving Emma staring after him. Despite her initial reluctance, the warmth of the cup tempted her, and Emma reached for it. The chocolate was rich and sweet, warming her from the inside. She watched as the man settled on a bench across the garden, sipping from his own cup while reading a book. Over the next few days, Emma found herself returning to the garden at the same time, and each day the silver-haired man would appear with 2 cups of hot chocolate. They rarely spoke beyond brief greetings, but there was something calming about his presence. He demanded nothing, expected nothing. A week after their first encounter, Emma's wheelchair got stuck on an uneven patch of the garden path. Struggling to free it, she felt frustration building inside her. Then the man was there, quietly assessing the situation before giving the chair a gentle push that dislodged it. "Thank you," Emma said grudgingly. "You're welcome," he replied with a slight smile. "I'm Richard, by the way. Richard Harrington." "Emma," she offered after a moment. "Emma Collins." That brief exchange opened a door. The next day, when Richard brought the hot chocolate, he sat closer, and they began to talk. Emma learned that Richard was 64, a retired architect who volunteered at the rehabilitation center several days a week. His wife of 35 years had died of cancer 3 years earlier, and he had found purpose in helping others through their own difficult journeys. "My sons thought I was crazy when I first started volunteering," Richard confided one afternoon. "They wanted me to travel, maybe move to Florida like other retirees, but after Caroline died, I needed to be somewhere I could be useful." Emma found herself sharing bits of her own story, her dance aspirations, the accident, Kyle's abandonment. Richard listened without judgment, his calm presence encouraging her to express feelings she had bottled up for months. "I hate how everyone looks at me now," she admitted one day. "Like I'm broken. Even my parents, they try so hard, but all I see in their eyes is guilt and pity." Richard nodded, understanding. "People often don't know how to respond to suffering," he said. "They want to fix what can't be fixed, or they want to run from what makes them uncomfortable." "Is that why you're here?" Emma asked. "Because you're not afraid of broken things?" "No one is broken, Emma," Richard said gently. "Changed, perhaps, but not broken." As winter melted into spring, Emma found herself looking forward to their daily conversations. Richard never pushed, never presumed to understand her experience, but his steady presence began to anchor her days. When Emma was finally discharged from the inpatient program, she faced the daunting prospect of moving back to her parents' suburban home. The thought filled her with dread. Their house had stairs, narrow doorways, and the weight of expectations she couldn't fulfill. "I can't go back there," she confessed to Richard on her last day at the center. "I love my parents, but living with them again, I'll suffocate." Richard was quiet for a moment, considering. "There's a building in my neighborhood," he said finally. "It was recently renovated for accessibility. I know the owner. I could make a call if you'd like to look at it." Emma hesitated, suspicious of his motives. "Why would you do that for me?" "Because I believe you need your independence," Richard answered simply. "And because I'd miss our talks if you moved to the suburbs." The apartment Richard helped her find was small but perfectly adapted for wheelchair use. Wide doorways, lowered countertops, a roll-in shower, details that would make independent living possible. The rent was reasonable, subsidized by a program for people with disabilities. Emma's parents were initially resistant. "How will you manage alone?" her mother fretted. "What if something happens and no one is there to help?" "I need to try," Emma insisted. "I can't figure out who I am now if I'm living in my childhood bedroom." With Richard's encouragement, Emma stood her ground. He helped coordinate resources, a part-time home health aide, accessibility modifications, connections to support groups. Despite her parents' concerns, Emma moved into the apartment, determined to rebuild some semblance of independence. The first weeks were harder than she had anticipated. Simple tasks like shopping for groceries or doing laundry became exhausting ordeals. There were days when Emma barely left her bed, overwhelmed by the effort required just to exist. Richard checked on her regularly, sometimes bringing groceries or takeout, other times just sitting with her through the difficult hours. He never attempted to fix her emotions, only offered his calm, steady presence. "Why are you doing all this?" Emma asked one evening after Richard had helped her sort out an issue with her adaptive equipment. "You hardly know me." Richard considered this, his eyes thoughtful. "When Caroline was sick, I learned that small kindnesses matter more than grand gestures. And perhaps selfishly, your company helps me too. The house feels emptier since she's been gone." As spring turned to summer, Emma began venturing out more, building stamina and confidence. Richard often accompanied her on these excursions, to the park, to local cafes, to accessible cultural events. They developed a rhythm together, an understanding that transcended the typical boundaries of friendship. Emma found herself watching Richard when he didn't notice. The way sunlight caught his silver hair, the thoughtful furrow of his brow when he concentrated, the gentle strength in his hands. She told herself it was natural to feel affection for someone who had shown her such kindness, but deep down, she recognized that her feelings were shifting into something more complex. The realization struck her one evening as they sat on her small balcony, watching the sunset. Richard was telling a story about his early career, and Emma found herself captivated not just by his words, but by the entire presence of him. His voice, his gestures, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. "I'm falling for him," she thought with a jolt of panic. "A man 40 years my senior. What am I thinking?" She withdrew slightly after that night, confused by her feelings and certain they would never be reciprocated. Richard noticed the change, but didn't press, giving her the space she seemed to need. The situation came to a head when Richard's older son, Michael, arrived for an unexpected visit and found his father at Emma's apartment, helping her hang curtains. Michael's initial confusion quickly turned to suspicion. "Dad, what exactly is going on here?" he demanded once they were alone. "She's young enough to be your granddaughter." "Emma is a friend," Richard replied calmly. "Someone I care about who's going through a difficult time." Michael scoffed. "Are you having some kind of midlife crisis? First the volunteering instead of enjoying retirement, and now this, befriending a young woman in a wheelchair?" Richard's voice remained steady, but Emma, overhearing from the other room, could detect the steel beneath his calm tone. "I don't need to justify my friendships to you, Michael. Emma is an important part of my life. I'd appreciate it if you could respect that." After Michael left, there was an awkward tension between them. Emma finally broke it, her voice trembling slightly. "Maybe he's right," she said. "Maybe this isn't appropriate. Richard looked at her directly. What is inappropriate, Emma? Caring about someone? Being there for each other? You know what people will think, Emma persisted. That I'm using you, or you're taking advantage of me somehow. And do you care more about what strangers think than what you know to be true? Richard asked quietly. Emma was silent, struggling with her answer. I care about you, she finally admitted. More than I should, maybe. And that scares me. Richard's expression softened. He moved closer, taking her hand in his. Emma, I've lived long enough to know that real connections are rare. What I feel for you, it's not pity or some misguided attempt to feel young again. It's deeper than that. But the age difference is substantial, Richard agreed. And yes, there are complications that come with that. But does it negate what we feel? Does it make our connection less meaningful? That night marked a turning point. Though they didn't define their relationship immediately, both acknowledged that what had developed between them was more than friendship. They moved forward cautiously, aware of the obstacles they faced, not just age and physical limitations, but the judgment of others. Richard's sons were initially resistant. Emma's parents were confused and concerned. Friends from both their lives questioned their choices, some openly, others with meaningful glances and whispered conversations. She's clearly with him for financial security, some speculated. He's just lonely since his wife died, others suggested. But as months passed, those closest to them began to see what Emma and Richard had recognized in each other, a genuine connection that transcended conventional expectations. The most unexpected development came nearly a year into their relationship. Emma had been experiencing unusual fatigue and nausea for several weeks. Attributing it to a medication change, she delayed seeing her doctor until Richard insisted. The diagnosis left her speechless. Emma was pregnant. Impossible was her first reaction. With her spinal cord injury, she had been told her fertility might be affected. Beyond that, she had barely considered the possibility of motherhood since the accident. It seemed like a dream that belonged to her previous life. When she told Richard, his initial shock gave way to a quiet joy. A child, he said softly, wonder in his voice. Emma, if you want this, we'll find a way to make it work. The pregnancy was high risk from the start. Emma's body, already compromised by her injury, faced additional challenges. Her doctors monitored her closely, warning of potential complications ranging from autonomic dysreflexia to difficulties during delivery. The news of the pregnancy intensified external scrutiny of their relationship. Richard's younger son, Thomas, confronted him directly. Dad, this is madness, he argued. You're 65 years old. When this child is 10, you'll be 75. Have you thought about that? And what about Emma? How is she supposed to care for an infant when she can't even stand up? Emma's mother expressed similar concerns. Sweetheart, I know you love him, but a baby changes everything. Are you sure this is what you want? Despite the doubts surrounding them, Emma and Richard remained committed to each other and to their child. They made practical preparations, researching adaptive parenting equipment, modifying Emma's apartment further, arranging for additional support services. Richard sold his house and moved into a larger, accessible apartment with Emma, a space where they could build their unconventional family. As Emma's pregnancy progressed, they formalized their commitment with a small, intimate ceremony. It wasn't a traditional wedding. Emma preferred to think of it as a celebration of their chosen family. Standing before their closest supporters, they exchanged promises that acknowledged both the depth of their connection and the challenges they faced. I promise to build a life with you that defies expectation, Richard vowed. To face each day with the same courage I've seen in you since the day we met. Emma, looking up at him from her wheelchair, responded, I promise to remind you that love isn't bound by convention or constrained by circumstance, to create joy with you, even when the path forward isn't clear. Their daughter, Lily Caroline Harrington, was delivered by cesarean section on a bright September morning. The delivery was complicated, requiring Emma to remain hospitalized longer than most new mothers. But when she held Lily for the first time, the months of worry and discomfort faded away. She's perfect, Richard whispered, tears in his eyes as he sat beside Emma's hospital bed, gently stroking their daughter's downy head. Parenthood brought new challenges. Emma couldn't lift Lily from a traditional crib, so Richard designed adaptive furniture that allowed her to care for their daughter from her wheelchair. They employed a part-time nanny to assist with physical tasks Emma couldn't manage, but Emma was determined to be as involved as possible in Lily's care. Richard, despite his age, approached fatherhood with enthusiasm and energy. Having raised two sons decades earlier, he brought experience to their parenting partnership, but he was careful not to overrule Emma's instincts or preferences. As Lily grew from infant to toddler, their family settled into its own rhythm. Emma returned to school, studying adaptive physical education with the goal of helping others with disabilities stay active. Richard reduced his volunteer hours to spend more time at home, embracing his role as an older father with a second chance at family life. To the surprise of many, including themselves, Emma became pregnant again when Lily was 2. This pregnancy, while still high risk, proceeded more smoothly than the first, perhaps because Emma's body had already navigated those waters once before. Their son, James Richard Harrington, was born healthy and strong, completing their family circle. With 2 young children, Emma and Richard's life became a delicate balancing act of adaptive equipment, careful scheduling, and creative problem-solving. They became adept at handling the curious stares and occasional rude comments from strangers. When a woman at the park asked Richard if he was enjoying a day out with his grandchildren, he smiled politely and replied, "No, these are my children. And this is my wife, Emma." Over time, even their most skeptical family members came to recognize the strength of their bond. Richard's son, Michael, initially the most resistant, gradually softened as he watched his father's happiness and met his half-siblings. During a holiday gathering, he pulled Emma aside, his expression earnest. "I was wrong about you," he admitted. "I thought." "Well, it doesn't matter what I thought. I've never seen my dad this happy, not even before my mom got sick. Thank you for that." As the years passed, their family grew and evolved. Emma completed her degree and began working with disabled youth, showing them that limitations didn't define possibilities. Richard, now in his 70s, remained active and engaged, though he occasionally joked about needing afternoon naps more than he used to. They faced health scares, a hospitalization for Richard with pneumonia that frightened them all, complications from Emma's injury that required additional surgeries. But through it all, they navigated as partners, each compensating for the other's vulnerabilities. On a crisp autumn evening, as they sat on their patio watching Lily and James play in the yard, Emma reached for Richard's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Taking a chance on us, despite everything?" Richard turned to her, his eyes crinkling with the smile that still made her heart flutter after all these years. "Not for a single moment," he said, squeezing her hand. "Every day with you and our children is a gift I never expected to receive." Emma nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Their love story wasn't one she could have imagined before the accident that changed her life's trajectory. It had been born in the aftermath of loss and trauma, nurtured through doubt and judgment, and had blossomed into something more beautiful than either of them could have foreseen. "Mom, watch this," called Lily, now 7, performing a cartwheel across the grass. "Dad, help me build a fort," demanded 4-year-old James, tugging at Richard's sleeve. Emma watched as Richard rose from his chair, moving more slowly than he once had, but with no less enthusiasm, to join their son on the lawn. She maneuvered her wheelchair to where Lily waited, ready to applaud her daughter's gymnastics routine. This was their life. Not defined by a wheelchair or gray hair or the raised eyebrows of strangers, but by the love they chose each day, by the family they had built against the odds. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't conventional, but it was theirs, a testament to the unexpected ways that hearts find each other, even across decades and circumstances. As the autumn light faded to dusk, Emma felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. For the hot chocolate that had started it all. For Richard's patient persistence, for the courage they'd both found to defy expectations and forge their own path. Their wheels of destiny had collided in that hospital garden, setting them on a journey neither could have anticipated. And despite all the challenges, despite the whispers and doubts, Emma wouldn't change a single turn of those wheels.